This podcast is brought to you by Most Valuable Podcasts, leading the league in podcasting entertainment.
What's up, everybody? Ricky Widmer here, along with the Mark Weber.
Dub them ease.
And you might be noticing two things. First off, Ricky, I hear your voice. Even though I'm on YouTube, I hear your voice, but I only see the onside kick logo. And with Mark, it kind of sounds like he's in a tunnel. No, it's not that bad. But Mark, over the phone today, we had to do an audio-only podcast because Mark having a little bit of issues with the house. Had to be like, hey, I can't come into the studio. We're doing things this way for today as we continue through our previews. We have two more left. We're going into the West. It is Manifest Destiny time to end the year. We're going to look at the AFC West in this podcast. If you're new to how we do these previews, we're going to start from the bottom. So that means we'll start with the Broncos. We will end with the team that finished first. That will be the Chiefs, who were 10-6 last year. Before we get into everything, a little bit of housekeeping here at the beginning. Number one, if you want to help support the channel more so than you already are by listening to this podcast, make sure to check out patreon.com/mostvaluablepodcast. That link down below in the description. You can also get yourself an MVP t-shirt. Don't worry, I'm not wearing the shirt, so you still can see me not wearing the t-shirt, but you can get that down below in the store link as well. The store is also at mostvaluablepodcast.com, where you can also catch MVP each and every day. And then last but not least, if you are on Apple Podcast, if you have iTunes, make sure to go on over, give the Onside Kick a 5-star rating, and then let us know why you like listening to the podcast each and every week. But Mark, it is AFC West time. We're taking a look, starting off with the Denver Broncos. And for me, this is the most interesting team. Well, maybe the second most, but they're definitely one of the top two most interesting teams in this division. They were 5-11 last year. They go ahead and get Bradley Chubb with their first-round pick. Their DC, they were saying his chin hit the floor when the Browns didn't draft Bradley Chubb with the number 1 overall pick. They signed Case Keenum, hoping that he can be the guy for Denver this year. I'll just ask you kind of a first question. Do you think the Broncos will be better, and how much better are they going to be in 2018?
100%. I mean, this team is definitely going to be better than last year. I mean, it's shocking to not only their defensive coordinator, but to me as well, that they would even have the chance to have drafted Bradley Chubb. I mean, that's a little bit of a. I mean, who knows? Baker Mayfield could be the next greatest of all time quarterback here, but I think this is one of those moments where you're going to sit there, you're going to look back and go, how did you pass up on Bradley Chubb? Mm-hmm. So I think they're going to be much better. The defense is already a really good defense. You add a guy like Bradley Chubb to that. You know, you look at the offensive side of the ball. They were fine running the ball. They just couldn't really get much going passing-wise. But you get a guy like Cortland Sutton, Royce Freeman as well to improve the run game. You get Case Keenum. You already got Emmanuel Sanders, Demaryius Thomas. So you've already got some really good options and good weapons. Do I think that this team is, all of a sudden miles and miles away better than they were last year? Not necessarily, but they definitely are a better team. They're definitely a team that this year actually can compete a little bit more, and that's going to make, the lives of Bronco fans much easier come Sundays.
Well, and for me, you say, hey, is this team going to be miles and miles better? I think they are. Like, this is a team, you can go ahead and book it, that the two teams now that are going to be fighting, and I'm sorry, Chiefs fans, we'll get to why I think this in your preview later, but I think this division is either going to be the Chargers to win or the Broncos to win. And like you mentioned it, they've got pieces on offense. Really my, not biggest question, but the one position that'll be interesting to watch is the running back position. C.J. Anderson no longer there, and it looks like Devontae Booker is going to be the starting back with Royce Freeman being the number 2 behind him. Royce Freeman being a nice guy that they drafted in the NFL draft, like you said. But Booker, the only worry there is he only got 79 touches last year for just under, I'm going to round up, 300 yards a year ago. So it'll be interesting to see what he can do with a workload like C.J. Anderson had, who had close to 250 attempts on the year. My biggest question, though, for this team has to be the man from Minnesota coming on over, and that is Case Keenum. This is a guy who, before last year, you would have said, oh, Case Keenum's your quarterback, and you would have been like, really? Is that the only option that we could have gotten in free agency is Case Keenum? Like, we couldn't get anyone else to be our quarterback. But after the year he had last year, the biggest thing Case Keenum needs to prove is that last year was not a one-hit wonder. I mean, he had over 3,500 passing yards. First time he's ever done that in his career. He had 22 touchdowns in a year. The first time he's had double-digit touchdowns in a year, and he only had 7 picks, almost his lowest. It was his lowest since his 2013 campaign, where he only had 6 picks on the year. What do you think about Case Keenum, and are you as kind of worried? I wouldn't say worried, but I'm going to say, are you as questioning on Case Keenum as I am coming into 2018?
Oh, definitely. I mean, 100%. Case Keenum's the kind of guy that you know what, you put it perfectly. Just before last season, you're sitting there going, oh, I can't believe that we're stuck with Case Keenum.
That's how I felt as a Viking fan.
Yeah, right? Then you move on and you're like, all right, cool. You know, this season goes really, really well for the Vikings for Case Keenum. You have a great offense, one of the best defenses. You know, I mean, how shocking was it to anybody who wasn't from Minnesota or who likes to wear purple jerseys to have a 5th-round pick and an undrafted free agent be the 1-2, one of the best wide receiver duos in the NFL last year? And that's crazy. You would never expect it, and it happened. You know, and it happened because the number 1 running back there, Dalvin Cook, who, even though he got injured, he was a great running back, but it didn't matter because you had a great backup as well. You know, there's a really solid offense. Well, the offensive line, I should say, I think it's more average, but it's an average. It's going to keep a guy like Case Keenum on his feet for this kind of fairly just, hey, I go back, I get the ball out of my hands to just the first guy open, you know, quick passes, dink and dunk, move your way up. And that's not even to get to the fact that, like I said, one of the best defenses in the NFL last year. And, you know, people are saying that, and I know Case Keenum's not there, and they have an upgrade at quarterback with Kirk Cousins, but people are instantly saying Super Bowl favorite for this year. Now, there shouldn't be any real surprise that when Case Keenum was in that offense, you know, on that team, very well-coached team, great young talent on that team, it shouldn't surprise anybody that, of course, he was going to perform well because he was in the ideal situation. He hasn't really been in that good of a situation really in his entire NFL career. You might be able to say 2013, maybe with Houston. You know, he was in a decent situation, but it certainly wasn't last year's Minnesota Vikings. So, yes, of course he had a great year. You know, some people might even argue that, well, he's never really had a full opportunity. This was his first time. You know, he had 15 games, but he had 10 with the Rams just the year before that. So he's had his opportunities and just hasn't been able to make it happen. Is it possible that just, you know, it finally clicked? And much like Kirk Cousins, who now is the quarterback of the Minnesota Vikings, one day he couldn't do it. The next day, boom, the job is his. And he finally becomes that franchise quarterback. Is it possible that that's Case Keenum? Yeah, sure. It's possible. I would be very surprised by that. I think that last year was really an anomaly in the career of Case Keenum, a guy who I think will continue what he's been so far, which is kind of a journeyman quarterback, a little bit of a backup quarterback, just going from place to place. That's really kind of what I expect out of them. And the thing, too, you got to think about, Vance Joseph is the coach. That's a defensive-minded coach. You got Musgrave out there for your offensive coordinator, which it's not like he's a bum coach or anything like that. He's a fine coach. But you really had a great coach in Minnesota, a great offensive coordinator in Minnesota to work with quarterbacks, and that really benefited Case Keenum.
Well, and the one thing I'll jump in and say is, although I am not like 100% on the bandwagon that like, ooh, Case Keenum is going to be, just fine and no questions. Although I'm high on this Bronco team, I'm not dumb. Like, I know that there's still that question that last year could have been the one-hit wonder for Case Keenum. However, the thing that Bronco fans should look at and have a little bit of confidence in is that if there's any team in the NFL besides Minnesota that Case Keenum could have gone to and have been comfortable in, it has got to be the Denver Broncos. And the reason why I say that is when I look at their roster, it kind of mirrors what Minnesota was kind of doing. You've got two receivers out there in Sanders and Thomas who will be like your Stephon Diggs and your Thielen. I want to see what Cortland Sutton can do if he can be a good third option for this Bronco team in the receiving core. They also got a young guy, Deshaun Hamilton, that I want to see how he develops as well. Jake Butt at tight end, he's no comparison to Kyle Rudolph. So, I mean, I'm not even going to throw the tight ends out there, but, I mean, it's not like he's chopped liver out there. And the running backs last year without Dalvin Cook, it was very much McKinnon and Latavius Murray being that dual back system. That could be what we see here between Booker and Freeman. And if they're just able to get the job done, not turn over the football, get good yardage on the ground like McKinnon and Murray did, then maybe Case Keenum can see some success, because this defense is, to me, phenomenal. It's a top 3 defense from last year. The only 2 defenses that were better than it in total yards were the Minnesota Vikings, where Case Keenum was, and the Jacksonville or Saxonville Jaguars. This is a defense. Von Miller's on it. We mentioned Bradley Chubb. There's also Josie Jewell, who I'm excited for. He's going to be a good pickup from the draft, a kid from Iowa. The other Brandon Marshall on this team, not the Brandon Marshall that's the wide receiver. And to me, the only question is that cornerback position of with Roby and Harris. How do they play with the stable of guys behind them? But like, I look at the stats from last year on defense, and like I mentioned, total yards, this defense for Denver was 3rd in the league. The only 2 defenses that were less than them was Jacksonville, and Minnesota had the least yardage against them all year. The thing that I find interesting is the points per game. Minnesota's defense only gave up 15.8 points per game last season. Denver's defense, 23.9. Now, the thing that you look into, because Denver didn't have a quarterback, they were only scoring 18 points a game. So they were getting outscored by about 5 points per game, if my math is serving me correct, where Minnesota was outscoring their opponents by almost 12 points per game. Minnesota had 23.9 points per game on offense, which was the exact same that Denver was giving up on defense. So if Case Keenum, to me, can just do that alone and help this offense get just a little bit more production in points, because that was the big thing that killed this team. They weren't able to get that production. They were only scoring 18 per game. The thing I'll ask you is, how much does that worry you that Denver might be, if these numbers stay the same, which they won't, how much does it worry you that this Denver defense was giving up 23.9. We'll round up 24. And Case Keenum was only getting about 24 points per game last year with Minnesota.
I do think there is some concern there because Case Keenum is not going to be a guy who's going to blow you away.
Mm-hmm.
That's just not his style. It's not what he's going to succeed in. He is a guy who will succeed with the dink and dunk, with the heavily supported by a nice, powerful run game. And seemingly that's what Denver has, and that's what Denver wants to be. You know, the concern, of course, as well when it comes to that, though, is they struggled in pass protection a bit last year.
Mm-hmm.
And the right side of their offensive line is pretty bad. So they're not in a terrible situation. I would say it's just a below average offensive line, but they have a strong side to it and they have a pretty weak side to it. And I think that Case Keenum can feel the pressure pretty quickly, especially when you think about the fact that the Chargers have an absolutely amazing pass rush. I'm sure that Gruden wants to go back to the glory days of black and blue football, so the Raiders are going to toughen up a little bit as well. You know, and then the Chiefs. The Chiefs are not going to be a joke as well when it comes to getting to quarterbacks. So you have not a great situation for a guy who isn't going to, like I said, absolutely blow you away. And a problem last year for the Broncos, too, you know, any team that doesn't have a really reliable quarterback not being able to sustain drives, so you give the other team a shortened field. And what does that do for you? It inflates your yards against deflates your yards against numbers, and then inflates your points against, because teams are more likely to score, but they're not going to put up as many yards on you. You know, that happens if you're not sustaining drives. That's going to happen if you're turning the ball over, which when you don't have a quarterback you can rely on, that's exactly what has just happened, essentially.
Well, and another thing that you mentioned before that was interesting was the coaching, too. Because, first off, to me, I don't know if this is my Viking bias coming out. You can call me on it, Mark, if it is. But I would take Mike Zimmer, and I would say Mike Zimmer is a way better coach than Vance Joseph has. Vance Joseph is just inexperienced at the head coaching position, and Mike Zimmer has done phenomenal things with the Vikings since coming there in 2014. There's not only
Vance Joseph needs time before we can really assess that. Yeah.
There's not only that question, but I wonder too how much the Pat Shurmur variable played into, like, are we going to, is this almost going to be like a Philadelphia Eagles situation where a lot of people are saying, well, don't crown Nick Foles because, I mean, Reich put him in great situations late in that Super Bowl run for him to be successful, with them having now Musgrave as because he was only the quarterback coach and the interim OC last year, now being the full-time OC. I mean, I'm looking back to his days. The last time he was an OC was 2015, 2016 with the Oakland Raiders, where he had Derek Carr. Yeah, and they were they were the 24th best offense in his first year, and then jumped all the way up to a top 10. They were at 6 his second year. So could we see that same thing, or this year might not be the good year? It could be next year where this Musgrave offense kind of takes off.
It's possible, but, you know, there are some things that concern me about it. And, you know, I mean, Musgrave was your offensive coordinator for you being the Vikings fan during AP's, you know, insane comeback from injury.
2011 to 2013.
He was your guy. And Zimmer decided, we're going to let you go. You know, that's when he gets to go to Philadelphia. He works with Foles. He works with Mark Sanchez. Not amazing. And then he gets to move over to Derek Carr. Derek Carr, great quarterback, of course. But, you know, the thing about Derek Carr is there's people who are wondering if he was just a flash in the pan. You know, because he had really an amazing rookie year and a good second year, and that Raiders team has not been as good as people had hoped it would be. So, there's definitely question marks to that. And there's question marks on whether or not he is going to actually be able to take a guy like Case Keenum and elevate him to that next level that the Broncos need him to be at. I do think it's a concern. Honestly, when it comes to this team, and I know we're harping on Case Keenum quite a bit, if they put him in a good situation, he's going to do just fine, just like he did in Minnesota. He's not going to go out there and lead the league, but he is going to be better than good enough to win you games.
The thing I also like about looking at the schedule for this team, and if you guys, I did do the Bronco prediction video, so go ahead and check that out. I'll pop it up if you're watching on YouTube so you can click on it. The thing I like about their schedule is it's not, in my opinion, it's not packed with hard-loaded teams, where for the division, I feel like this is a team that will split against the Chargers. They'll split against the Chiefs. They might split against Oakland. Oakland may play them tough in Oakland or at Oakland this year, but I could see them sweeping the Oakland Raiders. I'm not really high on John Gruden's Raiders this year. But then the other teams on their schedule, like the ones that I think they can win, Seattle I don't think is going to be what we're used to them. That could be a win. The Jets, although it's in New York, that's a win. Arizona, I would say that's a win, even though it's in Arizona. The Bengals, I'm not high on them. I'll give that to the Broncos. The Browns should be better, but, the Browns have to prove it to me before I go giving them like 6 to 8 wins this year. And then they have teams like Houston, but it's week 9. Are they going to be healthy then? And it's in Denver. You have San Francisco. I'm high on San Francisco, but not many people are. What kind of team are they going to be? To where, to me, there's the only ones that are like, these are your really tough games are week 6 against the Rams, week 12 against the Steelers. All the rest of them are very winnable games. I'm not saying they're going to go 14-2, but it's not a jam-packed, loaded schedule for the Denver Broncos.
Yeah, that's the thing with it. I mean, it really is going to depend a lot on how the team kind of gels together with some of these new pieces, because there are quite a bit of new pieces to the offensive side of the ball and defense as well, but especially on the offense, some significant pieces that have changed. But it's really going to depend. I mean, they've got some good things going for them. When they play the Texans, who are definitely a really good team, that's a home game for the Broncos. Steelers, that's going to be a home game for the Broncos. They get to have some of those type of advantages. When they play the Jets, which are a lesser team in the NFL, they're the road team. They get to play the Rams at home. So they get to be away against the Cardinals. They have that favorable schedule. You play weaker teams when you're on the road. You play stronger teams at home. Just a little bit of that kind of advantage schedule-wise for you. So you really look at something like that, and you think, this is a team that, even if, let's just say they're a 7-9 team, maybe they end up at 9-7 because of some of those advantages for them, and that could certainly help.
And I mean, the last thing I'll say about the schedule that's kind of a good thing is that they don't have, a lot of the games are very like away, home, where the only back-to-back home games they have are week 1 and 2, and then it's like, all right, we're at Arizona. Then we come back to Denver, we go to Kansas City. That's not that bad. All right, we're going to go to Cincinnati, come back to Denver, then we go to California. So it's not that bad. They don't have that like stretch of away games where it's like, man, we got this 3-game stretch where we're away, and we got to get it done. They have kind of some favorable back-to-backs, even the road ones. Before we move on to the Oakland Raiders, I ask you all the time, any final thoughts on the Denver Broncos?
My final thought on the Denver Broncos is just the Defensive Rookie of the Year watch for Bradley Chubb.
Really? You think he's going to be Defensive Rookie of the Year?
Well, he's in the best possible place that he could be in to do it, that's for sure. I mean, he's a phenomenal defensive player. He's a monster. And you look at, the advantage of having Von Miller there as well. That's going to be huge for him.
I'm trying to look at, because off the top of my head, I'm like, what other, like Roquan Smith, he hasn't signed yet. But like he could be in the running for it. Tremaine Edwards in Buffalo. I don't know if he's going to have so much success in Buffalo.
Yeah, I don't trust Edmonds in Buffalo, not because I don't like Tremaine Edmonds, but he's a bit of a project, and Buffalo's that defense is going to be on the field a lot.
I'm going to throw two sleepers at you. The two guys that I think they're both on the Packers, that could give Bradley Chubb a run for his money in the Defensive Rookie of the Year are going to be one of the cornerbacks in the Packers or in Green Bay, either Jair Alexander or Josh Jackson. One of those guys will give him a run for his money and kind of be that sleeper pick where it's like, whoa, we didn't expect one of them to be the Defensive Rookie of the Year. But then my final thoughts on the Broncos: favorable schedule. The defense should be really good. That should help Case Keenum. Don't be surprised if this offense, Case Keenum gets familiar with it quick, because it's got a lot of the similarities that he's familiar with from Minnesota last year. But it should be a good year for the Denver Broncos. Let us know what you guys think down below in that comment section. Bronco fans, how high are you on your team this year? Are you worried about Case Keenum? Are you not? What do you like? What don't you like? Let us know what you're thinking down below in that comment section.